Hey nerdy knitters! Sometimes in a knitter's life you find a pattern you just have to knit. You purchase it, you download it, and you flip to the instructions and it is filled with confusing numbers and abbreviations and punctuation, and you just don't know how to decipher what's on that paper. Well, today we're going to cover everything you need to know about reading knitting instructions. All of those confusing abbreviations and punctuations and numbers, how to decipher them, how to read them, and how to knit that project that you've been meaning to knit. Before we do, I just want to say, hey, I'm Tanya here at Nerdy Knitting, and I'm a certified knitting instructor and a knitwear designer. My goal is to help you become a confident, adventurous knitter. And you can certainly become more confident once you understand how written instructions for knitting patterns are written and how to decipher them for any project that you're working on. No matter how difficult or simple written instructions in a knitting pattern might be, they all involve three basic parts. They will have abbreviations, they will have numbers, and they will have repeats. Let's look at each of these parts in turn. We'll start with the simplest, abbreviations. Now this is a good thing to check in a knitting pattern. If the pattern you have doesn't even include a list of abbreviations, that's a poorly written pattern. A good pattern should always include a list of abbreviations. And this is really the most simple part of a pattern as well, because you'll look for that list and you use that list to decipher all of those abbreviations that are in your written pattern. Knit will be written with a K, purl will be written with a P, K2TOG is knit two together. All of those abbreviations will be included somewhere in a well-written pattern. We'll have a list how to translate all of those abbreviations. And as you get used to reading knitting patterns, then a lot of these will become second nature and you won't even have to check the abbreviation list for most of the instructions in your patterns. Now, once you understand knitting abbreviations, the next thing to tackle is the numbers. And even these can be divided up into a few little categories. The numbers that are in the actual written instructions, and then numbers that are used to delineate stitch counts, measurements, or for different sizes. Let's take a look at these and I'll show you exactly what I mean. Now, this is an example of numbers that are in the actual written instructions. Here's our setup round in a pattern, and it's telling you how many stitches to knit. If you don't know how to read a pattern, then this can seem awfully confusing. But let's start right at the beginning. The knit 40, and then all of these numbers, 46, 52, 58, those numbers in parentheses are just telling us the different sizes. So once you know which size you're going to knit, then you can find the corresponding stitch count here, and that's the one you would follow. Say you're knitting the medium, that would be the first one after the parentheses. So every time you would see that number after the parentheses right here, you would know that that's yours. So you would knit 46, place your marker, there's your abbreviation, knit 5, that's every size is doing that, place a marker, knit 8, place a marker, continue this until the next one, place that marker, and then here's all of those sizes listed with the different stitch counts. Find the one that you're using, and that's the number that you knit. Now, along with those numbers that are in the actual written instructions, we have numbers that could be used for sizes, stitch counts, measurements. Here's an example of that. Here's a decrease row. There's simple instructions there, 2 stitches before the marker, second marker, and then we have a number at the end. It's telling us how many stitches are decreased. That's for all sizes. Then it's telling us where to repeat that, and then here we have again, this is a stitch count, and this one is broken down by those sizes. When you know which size you're knitting, you look for that corresponding number in this list. And then further down, we have measurements, and this is the same thing. Work until the piece measures this approximate amount, and we have that in inches and in centimeters. When you know what size you're knitting, then this can become easier. You don't have to look at all of those numbers. You get a highlighter out. You just highlight the number that pertains to the size that you're working on. Now, I know seeing all those numbers at first can seem very confusing, but that's really what you need to focus in on. Once your size is narrowed down, then you can forget everything else that's in there. Just highlight what pertains to your size. And now let's move on to the last part of the pattern, and often the most confusing, how pattern repeats are written in. For our example today, we're going to use a box stitch pattern. It's a really simple basic pattern that alternates every few rows and produces little boxes of stitches, knits and purls, and creates a really nice texture, as you can see in this sample here in this scarf. You can tell from looking at the written instructions, the first 2 rows tell us which is the right side row, which is the wrong side row, and the asterisks show us which stitches are repeated. Here's a little demonstration. You would knit 2 and then purl 2 and then knit 2, and then that is your pattern repeat. The instructions here use that asterisk to show you what you're repeating. After you knit those initial 2 stitches, you're purling 2 and knitting 2, and then our instructions tell us to repeat from that little star. So we continue purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, knit 2 until we get to the end of our stitches. But this could actually be written a handful of different ways and still produce the same result. We'll use row 1 as our example. Here's the first alternate method that you could use. You can see we're still using our little asterisk symbol, but this time it's telling us repeat from the first one to the second one, and it has the stitches in between that will be repeated. And the next method also uses an asterisk. We have our knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, and now this one, it's telling us repeat from that to the end of the row. So anytime you see an asterisk like that, it's going to tell you what stitches you are going to repeat for that section of the pattern. But there are actually other ways you can write these simple repeats. You can use parentheses like this example here. We have a knit 2 and then purl 2, knit 2, and that's in parentheses, and this instruction tells us to repeat what's between those parentheses. And then method 4 also uses parentheses, but it tells us the specific number of times we're going to repeat those stitch counts within the parentheses themselves. But that's not the only form of punctuation you'll find. You can also find basic instructions that use brackets, like in method number 5. We have a repeat written, but this time a word repeat comes first, knit 2, and then repeat, and then our brackets with our numbers in it, and then it's telling us how many times to repeat that. So as you can see, that's 5 different ways to produce the same exact thing. They will all produce box stitch. Now that you understand the basics of how punctuation can be used to delineate the repeats in a pattern, let's go a little further and see some more complicated instructions. So first off, when you're looking at pattern repeats, these are the things you need to look for. Those little asterisk symbol, brackets, and parentheses. Those all will show you what is going to be repeated, but you can have patterns that use all 3 of those in one line. Our box stitch pattern just used 1 at a time, but some really complicated patterns will use all 3 of these punctuation methods at once. So let's look at how that will work in a pattern. First of all, you could have repeats within a repeat, like this example here. Now you'd want to break this down by each part. We start reading it just like we would normally. We start with that knit 2, and then we have our asterisk, the little star, that shows us the larger repeat, and then within that repeat we have parentheses that show repeat that's contained within the repeat. This is how we would work that. We would knit 2, you would purl 2, and then we have that second repeat within there. That's knit 2 together, yarn over, and then we have it telling us to do that twice. Now we go back to the first parenthesis, and that's what you repeat. You do that twice, and then you purl 2, knit 1, then we're at the end of our star, and it's telling us we repeat from the first asterisk, so we go back to that first one, and we repeat that again. Purl 2, and then we do what's in the parentheses, knit 2 together, yarn over twice. We repeat both of those, not just the yarn over. We go back to the first parentheses and repeat that again. Purl 2, knit 1, and repeat that until we have 1 stitch remaining, and our last stitch is a knit 1. Here's what this one would look like if it were written out completely, line by line, step by step. And now you can see why it's all abbreviated using the different punctuation to make things a little shorter and easier to manage. And now that you understand how a repeat can also be within another repeat, we're going to take that a step further and have even more repeats involved in one instruction. Now this cable pattern uses all 3 of those punctuation methods in one line of instructions. You can see right after the knit 2, we have an asterisk, a bracket, and a parentheses mark all together. Now this really demonstrates why repeat symbols are used, because if we wrote this all out, every instruction without the repeat and even without abbreviations, it would get really long. That's why we use all these punctuation marks to show the repeat patterns, and we use abbreviations to make things shorter and easier to manage. And I know it can look confusing at first, but we just break it down one symbol at a time. You look at the first repeat symbol, which is our asterisk, and you can see the first one and the last one, and it tells us where to repeat that. And then within that, we have brackets. You can see that bracket doesn't go the whole way. It goes right over to the right cross, and then it says twice. So that bracket's going to be repeated twice, and then we've got another parentheses after that. So you just start at the beginning and you work across. You have your knit 2, and then you begin your repeat. purl 1, knit 1, and that's in parentheses. So we do that as many times as it tells us, and it says 3 times. So we do that 3 times. Then we do our next instruction, which is a purl 1. Then we do our cable cross, our 2x2 cable. Then that's the end of the bracket, and after that bracket, we see the word twice. So we know we're going back to the beginning of that bracket. And we start at the beginning again, and then within the bracket, our first symbol is that parentheses. We have to repeat purl 1, knit 1 a few times before we do another purl 1 and our right cross. And then once we've done all of that, we're at the end of our bracket. We've done the twice, and we can go on to the next instruction, which is in parentheses. And that tells us how many times to repeat that. So I know at first glance, it's very difficult, but you just break it down step by step. You look for the asterisk first. That's your major repeat. And then within that, you have brackets, and then within the brackets, you can have parentheses. And now that you know how these work, you can apply it to any knitting pattern that you want to do, no matter how simple or difficult. And I have a project here that you can practice on. It uses 4 basic stitch patterns, and you'll find the written instructions and the charts, but each of the written instructions I've done using a different method, so you can practice reading the way repeats can be written. And of course, all of them are just basic stitch patterns, so they're not really difficult like our last example with that cable crossing was, but you'll get used to reading different written instructions as you make this scarf. So you can find the link for that scarf down in the video description box, and you can start knitting that and practicing your written instructions. And if you're looking for some guidance on how to read a knitting chart, then check out the video I've linked right here as well.